Recently, news broke that Marvel and DC Comics will be teaming up this year to produce two brand new one-shot crossovers, marking the first intercompany story in over 20 years. This is huge news, and it got me thinking about prior comics that saw these two superhero worlds collide. On this channel previously, I've covered the likes of Superman vs Spider-Man from 1976 and the Marvel DC amalgam comics from the mid to late 1990s, but perhaps my favourite instance of these two industry stalwarts encountering each other was actually the final time it occurred, Kurt Busiek and George Perez's incredible miniseries JLA Avengers. Published from September 2003 to March of 2004, this 4-part story saw Earth's mightiest heroes fight both against and alongside the Justice League of America, with the fate of both universes hanging in the balance. Given their status as comics' two premier superhero ensembles, this crossover was incredibly noteworthy, and stands today as one of the best examples of two rival companies working together to create a truly memorable and iconic story. And so in this video, I want to explain the history behind JLA Avengers, discuss how it came to be, and the near 20-year battle it took for the comic to finally be brought to life, and consider how Busiek and Perez's tale showcases and represents everything great about Marvel and DC's heroes individually, as well as how it celebrates the beauty of these generational crossovers. Before we continue though, just a quick reminder to leave a like on this video if you enjoy it, and subscribe to Owen Likes Comics so you don't miss out on any future videos. To understand the significance of JLA Avengers, it's first important to overview the history of Marvel and DC's collaborations, and the prior attempts to make these two beloved ensembles face off. Before 1970, Marvel and DC were fiercely competitive rivals, with the very notion of them ever working together seeming unimaginable. However, in 1970, Marvel obtained the rights to make a comic adaptation of The Wizard of Oz, only to learn that their distinguished competition was simultaneously developing their own series. Realizing that two Wizard of Oz books being released at the same time would massively hurt both sales, the two companies decided to co-produce one singular comic together, resulting in 1975's MGM's Marvelous Wizard of Oz. Following the release of this series, discussions between the two companies began about more potential partnerships in future years. A chance meeting between David Obbs, Stan Lee's literary agent at the time, and Warner Brothers executive Howard Kaminsky saw the first conversations take place regarding a Superman and Spider-Man team-up. Eventually, Gerry Conway and Ross Andru were selected to develop the series, and in January of 1976, Superman vs. The Amazing Spider-Man was released. As you might expect, this comic was a massive success, and the incredible response to it from fans led to the companies producing even more team-up books. In July of 1981, a sequel comic was released, and later that same year, Batman vs. The Incredible Hulk hit shelves within the pages of DC's Special Series number 27. 1982 followed suit, with Chris Claremont, Walt Simonson and Terry Austin's Uncanny X-Men and the New Teen Titans being released in August. But while all of these comics were exciting and sold a significant number of copies, they were all short, one-shot and one-off adventures. Marvel and DC were both aware of this, and behind the scenes began devising a bigger, larger scale and longer running crossover that would bring together two of their most acclaimed groups, the Justice League of America and the Avengers. Conversations surrounding a JLA Avengers crossover began as early as 1979, with an agreement formally being reached to produce a book in 1982. This agreement would see Gerry Conway, a longtime Marvel writer who is currently working at DC on Justice League, write the series alongside artist George Perez. DC would oversee the book's production, while Marvel would handle marketing and distribution. With all of these decisions made, Conway and Perez got to work developing their story. The basic premise would see the DC villain Lord of Time team up with Marvel's Kang the Conqueror to obtain a mysterious gemstone, and their pursuit of it would cause several encounters between members of the Avengers and the Justice League. However, not long after Conway began writing the series, problems began to arise behind the scenes. You see, after DC approved Conway's initial plot, the script was then sent to Marvel editor-in-chief Jim Shooter, who rejected it and asked it to be rewritten. This eventually led to Roy Thomas being hired to redraft Conway's plot, but caused tension between Shooter and DC editor-in-chief Dick Giordano, as well as scheduling issues for George Perez. On his blog, longtime Marvel editor Tom Brevoort explains,
DC, who were producing the book, gave a green light to George to start drawing writer Jerry Conway's plot before it had officially been approved by Marvel. This led to infighting among the two companies, as Marvel's team didn't feel that the plot worked as written. Eventually, Roy Thomas was brought in to revise the plot in an attempt to get the project back on track, and to use the 21 pages that George had already penciled. But it was all for nothing. The window of Perez's availability had closed, and the book was never finished.
Roy Thomas's revised plot was submitted to DC in July of 1983, with Giordano meeting with Shooter at San Diego Comic-Con later that year to discuss the latest draft. According to reports, Shooter either hadn't read Thomas's draft yet, or requested additional time for feedback from other Marvel staff. Either way, this tension between the two companies only grew, and in August of 1983, George Perez announced that he was quitting the project altogether. That same month, Perez expressed his frustration when speaking with Comics Interview, stating that,
"The book was supposed to be out 3 months ago. Granted, the plot wasn't approved the first time, but everything since then is because Jim Shooter has not done a single thing to help it along. He's procrastinated, ignored it, and actually made it seem that DC was the one that was constantly dragging their feet. As editor-in-chief, it was his duty to get that thing edited and either accept it or refuse it as quickly as possible. He did not do it, and I have no confidence that he will do it. I can't wait anymore. It broke my heart. I had been looking forward to this assignment before I had even turned pro. I lived for waking up to get started on those pages. It's the most heartbreaking decision I've ever had to make."
After Perez's departure, Marvel quietly announced the project was on hiatus in November 1983, and reports began to surface the next year that JLA Avengers had been officially cancelled. In June of 1984, Perez signed an exclusive contract with DC, and wouldn't actually work for Marvel again until 1991. In the meantime, both companies moved on to other internal projects that ended up having major ramifications on the comic book landscape. For Marvel, 1984's Secret Wars, written by Shooter with art by Mike Zeck and Bob Layton, was a game-changing series, serving as Marvel's first true company-wide crossover event, and forever changed the relationship between comics and toys, as the book was commissioned alongside a new range of Mattel action figures. Likewise, DC embarked on its own massive crossover a year later, as Perez teamed with writer Marv Wolfman for Crisis on Infinite Earths. This epic 12-issue series resulted in the complete reboot of DC's comic book universe, and a brand new era for superhero storytelling. And in the new post-Crisis and Secret Wars landscape, neither Marvel nor DC were interested in doing another crossover. Even with Shooter's departure from Marvel in 1987, it appeared as if this era of frequent team-ups had come and gone, and a Justice League Avengers crossover would never see the light of day. This mindset continued into the early 1990s, but as the comic book market began to crash and both Marvel and DC experienced financial hardship, the idea of collaborating once again started to resurface, and would eventually open the door for George Perez's dream project to finally be realised. At the start of the 1990s, the prospect of another DC and Marvel crossover seemed unlikely, as both companies had recently revitalised their universes and seen a strong upturn in sales. This trend continued into the early 90s with the monumental success of books like The Death of Superman and X-Men #1, which showcased the individual successes that both publishers were having. This success though wouldn't last. The speculator market, which had caused a dramatic rise in comic sales, soon began to falter and crash, and by 1996, the entire comic landscape seemed like it was on the verge of collapsing. Alongside this sharp downturn in sales, Marvel and DC's place as the unquestionable industry leaders was starting to be challenged, with the rise of new companies like Valiant and Image. As a result, Marvel and DC started to discuss whether another collaboration would be possible. hoping it would boost both sales and mainstream interest in both companies' outputs. Mike Carlin and Mark Gruenwald were eventually hired to develop this series, simply named Marvel vs. DC or DC vs. Marvel. Written by Ron Mars and Dan Jurgens with art by Peter David and Claudio Castanelli, this 4-part series pitted the two companies' most popular heroes against one another. Its first 2 issues featured such long-awaited battles as Wolverine vs. Lobo, Captain America vs. Bane, and Superman vs. Hulk, before the 3rd issue revealed an exciting twist for the project. Here, the two universes were suddenly fused together, creating a slew of all-new heroes made from existing DC and Marvel characters. In between issues 3 and 4, the two publishers instead released 24 one-shots under the banner of Amalgam Comics, introducing readers to the likes of Darklaw, Batman meets Wolverine, Super Soldier, Captain America meets Superman, and the incredibly named Dr. Doomsday, before the two worlds were restored in the title's climactic chapter. Nevertheless, Marvel vs. DC and the Amalgam Initiative were both huge successes, regularly topping the sales charts for 1996 and providing a much needed boost for both the two publishers as well as the entire comic industry. With this success, another Amalgam crossover would hit shelves in June of 1997, while Marvel and DC remained open to developing future projects together. This coincided with George Perez, who had returned to Marvel several years earlier to work on the Infinity Gauntlet, being hired to draw a new Avengers run alongside writer Kurt Busiek. Beginning in February of 1998, Busiek and Perez's take on Earth's mightiest heroes would be met with critical and commercial acclaim, today being regarded as one of the all-time best runs for the group. With Perez now firmly back at Marvel and the two companies looking for future stories to publish together, the artist pitched his long-dormant JLA Avengers project to Marvel editor-in-chief Joe Quesada. In 2000, Busiek and Mark Waid, then writer of the Justice League, publicly announced that the comic was in development, with the idea being to share writing duties while Perez would pencil the entire series. Both DC and Marvel would officially confirm JLA Avengers in 2002, with this long-awaited crossover finally being released in September 2003. While Waid was no longer involved due to other projects, Busiek and Perez built off their excellent Avengers work and crafted an in-continuity tale that would see them both fight and team up with DC's premier ensemble. To say anticipation ran high in and around the comics world would be an understatement. Yet, under the watchful eye of this legendary creative team, JLA Avengers would not only meet fans' lofty expectations, but provide a generational crossover that would undoubtedly be worth 2 decades of wait. Busiek and Perez's JLA Avengers is centered around the DC villain Krona. In the first issue, it's explained that Krona is on a quest to destroy different universes to learn the truth behind all of reality, and in his pursuit, he has discovered the Marvel Universe and encountered the Grand Master. The two decide to play a game. Each person will select a team of champions to obtain 12 artifacts, and if Krona wins, the Grandmaster will aid him in his search for knowledge by taking him to Galactus. However, if the Grandmaster wins, Krona must spare the Marvel Universe and return to his reality. In a cruel twist of fate, Krona selects Earth's mightiest heroes, the Avengers, as his champions, meaning their victory would result in their world's annihilation. This exchange provides the basic setup for this 4-issue adventure. The main story, though, begins with the Justice League encountering Terminus, a villain from the Marvel Universe. After they work together to defeat him, Hal Jordan, now the Spectre, appears before them and explains that Terminus isn't from this world. Meanwhile, on Earth 616, the Avengers face a similar problem as Starro appears in the heart of New York City. As the Avengers contend with Starro, we follow the JLA as they return to the Watchtower, only to be met by the Grand Master. He explains Krona's plans and states that the heroes must find 6 artifacts from the opposing reality to prevent both worlds' destruction. The League then teleport to Earth 616 and arrive on Monster Island, where they search for the ultimate nullifier. Before they can obtain it though, a purple arrow flies from out of nowhere and knocks it out of reach. Wonder Woman is able to grab the nullifier though, and the JLA teleport home. As they leave, we see the Avengers watching on from a distance. They're confronted by Metron, who explains the 6 items they must locate from the other universe and gifts Iron Man a mother box that he can use to send them to the DC universe. Issue 1 concludes with the Avengers arriving in Metropolis before coming face to face with the JLA. Tensions rise between the two ensembles before Thor throws his hammer at Superman and an epic fight breaks out. While the various Avengers and Justice League members fight, the comic focuses mainly on the encounter between Batman and Captain America. Both men express that they feel like pawns in a bigger scheme and agree to work together to discover what's really going on. As the two groups race across their worlds to collect the artifacts, Batman and Cap go to the Batcave where Steve discovers Bruce's memorial to Jason Todd, causing his mind to race back to the death of Bucky. Meanwhile, the Batcomputer locates Metron and the Grandmaster on the moon, with Cap receiving a time bike from the Fantastic Four, allowing the pair to travel to their whereabouts. When they arrive, they're unexpectedly met by the Atom, who had shrunk himself down and secretly travelled with Metron earlier. Atom explains the conversation he overheard between Metron and the Grandmaster, as well as the latter's deal with Krona. Realising the dire consequences this game will have, Steve and Bruce rush back to warn their respective teammates as we find the heroes fighting over the Cosmic Cube in the Savage Land. They arrive as Quicksilver and Flash race to retrieve the cube, with Pietro winning as Wally fails to access the Speed Force. Quicksilver holds the cube as Krona and the Grandmaster appear before them, noting that the score is tied between the two teams until Batman arrives and grabs the cube while Cap orders the Avengers to stand down. As Grandmaster declares the JLA have won, meaning Krona must concede and return home, the multiversal villain attacks him and summons Galactus himself. Both groups of heroes watch on as Krona fights with Galactus before a nearly dead Grandmaster uses the last of his powers to summon the artifacts and wield them against his foe. With all of reality hanging in the balance, Grandmaster unleashes one final cosmic blow and the entire world suddenly fades white. This leads into issue 3, which opens in somewhat confusing fashion. We pick up with the Justice League, now alongside Hawkeye, observing Doctor Doom joining the Source Wall. Meanwhile, the Avengers are back on their Earth fighting Brainiac. Captain America notes to his teammates that something feels wrong. However, Wasp interrupts and states that the Justice League are on their way for their annual visit. The League arrive at the Avengers mansion, the comic then suddenly shifts to the Watchtower and then inexplicably back to the mansion on the next page. This causes both Captain America and Superman to explode with confusion, blaming each other for warping reality as Wasp attempts to calm them down. However, as the two men start to fight, we're suddenly transported to a snowy metropolis, where Aquaman notices that his missing hand has somehow been restored. Meanwhile, over in the Marvel Universe, Superman, Batman and Martian Manhunter all encounter civilians from each reality, with John Jones theorising that the two worlds are somehow fusing together. Superman and Iron Man fly into space and are shocked to discover that both Earths are in fact merging. The two teams regroup in the Watchtower, where they're met by the Phantom Stranger, who takes them to see a dying Grandmaster. Here, Grandmaster explains that he's responsible for this incursion, as he attempted to trap Krona in between the two universes. However, the two worlds are incompatible, and instead of merging, they're set to destroy themselves. With the fate of both worlds hanging in the balance, the two groups work together to separate their realities and defeat Krona for good. Captain America meets with Superman in private and apologises for their earlier argument, before giving him his iconic shield to wield in battle. The heroes jet into space and find Krona hiding in the remains of Galactus, where he's now guarded by a fleet of parademons. As the heroes fight against the villain's army, time and space continues to rapidly collapse. Characters suddenly age from one page to the next, heroes are replaced by their long deceased counterparts, and their costumes even alter to older designs. Nevertheless, the heroes persevere and chip away at Krona's defense. Superman, now wielding both Cap's shield and Thor's hammer, leads the charge as everyone from Green Lantern, Iron Man, Scarlet Witch and Wonder Woman unloads on the villain. While this onslaught doesn't defeat Krona, it does manage to distract him, buying enough time for Hawkeye to shoot an arrow that rips open time and space itself, sucking the villain into it. The remainder of the heroes watch on as, with the help of the Spectre, the Marvel and DC universes are once again separated. The Justice League and the Avengers celebrate and form an unshakable bond. Superman and Cap exchange one last salute and wish their counterparts well, and with that, the comic flashes white once more, and each group returns home. And while their regular status quos are seemingly restored, each hero retains the knowledge and the memory of the day that the Justice League and the Avengers briefly fought as one. In the 2 decades since JLA Avengers was released, this series has garnered a legacy as one of the best and most beloved crossovers in all of comics history. And I think this acclaim is incredibly well deserved. Considering the troubled production this book had during its 20+ year development, the fact an Avengers Justice League crossover even exists is a miracle and an achievement in itself, let alone the fact that it's a genuinely fun and exciting story with faithful and well-written versions of both teams that celebrate each's place as two of the industry's flagship ensembles. The comic was incredibly well received when it hit shelves back in late 2003 and early 2004, and it has continued to establish its place as a fondly remembered event in years since, particularly as no more DC and Marvel collaborations have been released since. When considering what JLA Avengers attempts to say about both sets of superheroes, as well as what future projects of this nature can learn from it, I sat down with Sal from ComicPop to get his thoughts on this acclaimed series and discuss what its legacy is today. You were reading JLA Avengers when it came out, or in the period in which it was coming out?
Oh yeah, no, I picked it up brand new off the rack. I was aware of its release, and I, at the time, was getting back into comics. 2003 was a big time for me to get back into comics. I was reading Babylon 5 creator J. Michael Straczynski's Spider-Man. Yeah. I was reading Bendis's New Avengers, and or at the very least, I was reading Bendis books. At that point, I was already hooked, and so JLA Avengers comes on the scene, and I'm like, okay, I have to see how this goes, because I'm a sucker for crossovers. And so I picked it up, and I did not get it, because I did not read the Busiek Perez run back then. And it took me some time, but eventually, rereading it, especially in the wake of the crossover and after it was over. And I think I've said this a number of times, but I'll say it again on your show. But this is the longest period since 1976 that we have not had a Marvel DC crossover. This era we're in now, between JLA Avengers and now. And it's kind of almost okay if we never get another one, because
this is such a perfect book. Yeah. And then thinking about kind of the time in which, in the era in which JLA Avengers happens, it's a really defining moment for both groups.
Yes.
Because like you said, the Justice League in the early to mid 90s aren't exactly the heavy hitters. And then you get the Morrison, which then leads into Wade, who's writing the JLA when this happens.
Yep.
And then over on the Avengers, you've got Kurt Busiek and George Perez take over in 98, kind of still wiping the stench of Heroes Reborn off the team. The run is a great encapsulation. It's a modern take on classic 60s, 70s Avengers.
Yeah, it's a Morrisonian take on the event. It's Busiek's coverage of the Avengers is to the Avengers as Morrison's is to the Justice League. And isn't that amazing that around that time, or at the very least in their respective eras, they also thought, let's cross them over at that exact time. What a perfect time, because you can imagine how uniconic it would have looked in 1996 or even 2007.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a perfect moment in time where both books, because even by 2002, obviously Morrison had left JLA to go and do X-Men, but Mark Waid steps in, and Waid does a great run on his own regard at that point.
100%.
And so it is a real generational period for both books.
Yeah.
And then they cross over. And one of my favorite things about this book is the fact, one, it is in continuity.
Yes.
And two, even though Busiek and Perez are the Avengers creative team, they're two creators that have such an affinity and history with the DC characters as well.
Yep.
When I was rereading it last month, I was explaining it to a friend who hadn't read it and was like, yeah, Captain America's hanging out in the Batcave, and then the Thing shows up. And the thing with it is, no pun intended, it all feels really natural.
Absolutely. No, it is both a highlight and celebration and contrast of both universes in a way that you couldn't do it alone. The classic Avengers team and creative force behind it was essentially showing you why the Avengers are relevant, or at the very least why people have some affinity or adoration for it and how they matter. I would almost say it's a justification for the Avengers, but it's more of a celebration.
Yeah.
And the Justice League is just kind of like, finally, we are where you thought we were the whole time.
It's something I keep coming back to when I'm writing this video, and I think you described it really succinctly. This book is it's an achievement that could only exist in a very, very small and particular window.
Yeah.
Because like you said earlier, this is, 2003, 2004 is the age of like, it's the new era of comics. It's the Bendis age. It's the Miller age. It's the cinematic age. This feels like the last vestige of the preceding kind of generations of comics.
Yeah. You could define this book as kind of like the end of that era, of like the pre-corporate era almost. It's very,
it's kind of like, and with like the long history that Perez has going back to like the late 70s and 80s, it's almost like the end of like the 20th century of comics.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
In my opinion, JLA Avengers is a classic in every sense of the word. For a story that once seemed completely unimaginable and then spent 20 years in development hell, it's a tale that lives up to the hype of these two iconic teams finally crossing paths. George Perez's artwork is stellar throughout each issue, giving the story a truly timeless and quintessential feel, while Kurt Busiek's deep knowledge and reverence for both universes allows for a surprisingly deep exploration of characters, history, and the things that define both DC and Marvel. Above all else, JLA Avengers feels like a celebration of each group and the universes that they represent, showcasing the best that these two companies have to offer and what makes their comics distinct and unique. For a crossover of this nature and with so many characters and plot points to include, it's impressive how Busiek and Perez never managed to lose focus of this, and prioritise the interpersonal drama and character dynamics between these heroes amid the high concept and sometimes convoluted plots. Moments like Captain America visiting the Batcave, bonding with the Dark Knight over their shared loss of their former partners, Superman and Thor bantering over lifting Mjolnir, or Hawkeye's tense relationship with Green Arrow. They not only give fans dream encounters, but they do so in a way that feels consistent with who these heroes are, and the roles they serve in their respective universes. This doesn't mean that there aren't moments of pure fan service though. The page of Darkseid wielding the Infinity Gauntlet, for instance, is simply one small part of the second issue's fetch quest, but an incredible moment for long-time readers. Nevertheless, the creative team managed to balance all of these moments with telling a truly enthralling and clever story that ultimately serves to celebrate these two amazing groups of heroes. Considering this was a project George Perez dreamed of bringing to life and spent much of his professional career trying to will into existence, there's something poetic about him finally realising his vision and it being the final DC Marvel crossover published to date. There's a whole generation of readers that know JLA Avengers as the ultimate superhero crossover, and it set a bar that any story published either before or afterwards would struggle to reach. However, with the news that DC and Marvel will be reteaming for two one-shot crossover comics in 2025, I hope that they reflect on what made JLA Avengers such an incredible story when crafting the next encounter between these two worlds. I'm personally very excited to see what comes next, but I also think it's important to look back and reflect on this amazing series and the turbulent history behind its creation. Against seemingly insurmountable odds both on and off the page, the Justice League and the Avengers stood defiantly side by side, fulfilling a lifelong vision of one of comics' greatest artists and realising the dreams of generations upon generations of fans. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to leave a like on this video, leave a comment down below as well. Let me know your thoughts on everything we talked about in today's video. I can't wait to hear what you have to say as always. If you're new to Owen Likes Comics, please make sure to hit the subscribe button and the notify bell so you don't miss out on any future videos. And if you enjoyed this and you want some more, there should be some other videos on screen right now that you might also enjoy. If you want to help help support the channel and help me make more videos, you can do so by going to patreon.com/OwenLikesComics. Or if you just want some more of me, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram and Blue Sky, just at Owen Likes Comics. But that's all for this video. Again, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you next time. But until then, take care and keep reading.